It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Folks, there's a lot of stuff in the news, a lot of stuff that's been going on, whether it started really with Nancy Pelosi disinviting Trump to the State of the Union. Then you had President Trump grounding her plane. Then you had, out of the blue, this BuzzFeed story that was totally bogus, that Robert Mueller just spanked down the media. I've never seen anything like it. And then the media, they were so embarrassed that they decided to make and try to ruin the lives of some high school kids from Kentucky. I mean, that's the way I see these stories over the last couple of days. Joining us now to talk about this and much, much more, we have Mr. Dan Perkins is back with us. He's a master storyteller, the author of the Brotherhood of the Red Nile trilogy, and you have seen him talk nationally about radical Islam. He's a contributor to The Daily Caller, Clash Daily, LifeSet, Newsmax.com, and TheHill.com. Dan Perkins, welcome back, sir.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. It's always great to have you. So that was kind of my summary of what's happened in the last couple of days. It's been a jam-packed news cycle the last few days. I feel like a lot of stuff is happening in the midst of a government shutdown. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you. I think that the news media did not comport itself very well last Friday and Saturday, and I would like to think that they're going to stop and take a look at what they've done, and do some self-examination. But I don't think they will. I really don't. Their hatred for Donald Trump is so high and so biased and so all-encompassing. They don't know how to act other than to do everything they can to try and destroy him. And I wrote a piece which will be out hopefully today or tomorrow about the Nancy Pelosi situation. In there is the quote where she says she's equal to the president. And in the piece, I raised the constitutional question. Yes, she is third in line of succession behind the president. Should something happen to the president, the vice president, she would become president of the United States. However, the Constitution is very clear that the president of the United States is elected by the people to be the president of the United States. The American people do not vote for her to be Speaker of the House. The 435 representatives in the Congress decide. And, by the way, the President of the United States is the chief executive officer of the administration. There is no chief executive officer for the Congress. There are Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader of the Senate. And so she doesn't carry an executive position the way the President does. Number two, the Constitution, Article 2, clearly says that the President is to report to the American people the State of the Union. And in the early founding of the country, it was done written so that it could be published in the various newspapers across the country to communicate to the American people what the President thought the State of the Union really was. Then, with the advent of radio and television, it became less and less written and more oral and visually. But he does have an obligation under the Constitution to report. And it is an extended invitation from the Speaker of the House to the President. However, my research has not found any example in the history of our country that the President has not been invited to come and speak on an appointed date to the Congress. And she actually invited him, but then she decided she was going to disinvite him. So the games that are going on, I want to say they're child's play, and they're acting like children. But the problem is the issues are so serious. You know, I look at what the Democrats are doing, and they did it last year, and they're doing it again. They believe that they have the moral authority to represent all of the people and decide that illegal immigrants are more important than United States citizens. And that's clearly demonstrated by what they're saying. When you want to have open borders, and when you want to get rid of ICE, and you want to get rid of border control, and you want to let anybody come here with no investigation whatsoever. They are clearly in favor of illegal immigration against the citizenship of the United States. The president says we can't do that. And so that's the real issue. The real issue is the desire of the Democrats to pollute the country, to dilute the country, and try and find ways in which to maintain their power.
I couldn't agree more. I would add that the last State of the Union address that the president did was very good for him politically. I mean, even the talking heads at CNN, I think I remember Van Jones, of all people, being like, Donald Trump became president tonight. You remember you had the gentleman from North Korea, who was held up as crutch. I mean, all of these things. And if the State of the Union were allowed to happen, the president would have had angel moms, I'm assuming. You would also have, more than likely, the empty seat of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is something the left doesn't want. And so I think that's why Nancy Pelosi did what she did. It was just the president would have won even more people if he would have been allowed to speak.
Well, if you look at the most recent, not last Saturday, but the previous week, the presentation from the Oval Office of Donald Trump about the immigration and border, and the Democratic response. Now, I'm trying to be kind here, but I'm also trying to be objective. What amazed me about Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer was, with all the dynamics going on in the Democratic Party, are they trying to tell me that the best they could do was two old white people who can't even talk to represent the democratic interest of the American people? Now, I grew up and was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, and I was a hunter. And each year we had deer season, and we had a huge excess population of deer. And you could see the carcasses all over the highways throughout the year. And the reason was, when a deer would come out at nighttime and walk out on the road and saw the headlights of the car, it would be frozen. It couldn't move because the lights were so mesmerizing. Nancy Pelosi, if you looked at her response, just looked at her visually, she looked like a deer in the headlight. She had no compassion, neither did Chuck Schumer. It looked like the deer in the headlights and the Undertaker. And it was a terrible, terrible position they put themselves in. They tried to anticipate what the president was going to say. All the things that they said had nothing to do with what he said, so they looked like fools again. So I think that Nancy Pelosi saw what happened when the American people got to see the difference between Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck speaking to them on an important issue, giving him the platform of the State of the Union address. You're right. You're absolutely correct. That their great concern is that he would continue to bond with the American people. Nancy Pelosi is getting more than 50% disapproval of her position based on Rasmussen polls. But what's more important is the internals, is that while she's got 50% of the people who absolutely don't think she's doing a great job and she's dangerous, another 40% are somewhat dissatisfied with her. So she's getting terrible, terrible numbers. And she's not endearing herself with the American people. And they don't want the president to be able to have the forum. Now, I don't know what's going to happen there, whether the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, isn't going to invite him to speak from the Senate, or will he go to some other venue and give his presentation? I don't know how it's going to work out, but he's not going to give up the opportunity to comply with the second Article 2 about his responsibility to talk to the people about the State of the Union.
Yeah, he clearly has to do it. Did you see the media coverage, Dan Perkins, of the difference in when Nancy Pelosi uninvited President Trump? You had reporters from CNN, celebrating it. What a beat down. She's really, really giving it to the president. And then when the president grounded her plane, they were all like, "Oh, Donald Trump, he took the low road." And I just thought to myself, man, these are the same. There was one screenshot that I saw on Twitter of the same CNN reporter reporting radically differently based on Nancy doing what she did and the president doing what he did. And I thought, wow, if anything here, I think there may be opportunities for people realizing just how, when the president says the fake news is the enemy of the American people. I mean, we're really figuring that out. I think there's a lot of new people who are coming, who are kind of waking up, being like, oh, wow, there's something not right about this.
Yeah. Whether you saw Chris Matthews from MSNBC, formerly with the San Francisco Chronicle, been on television a long time. His reaction to the president's withdrawal of the aircraft, his comment was, I thought was quite surprising. He said, the president embarrassed the Democratic Party. Embarrassed the Democratic Party by taking away her airplane. So, but it's also an example of why she's not equal to the president, because the president can decide whether or not she's going to fly on a military aircraft or not. She can't. And that's one of the difference between why he's president and she's not.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that that the Democrats are not winning this battle. They're trying to convince themselves that they are, but the American people see what's going on, and I would say to you, I think that there's going to be another announcement about the wall and what could be done and the shutdown that is going to create a very significant problem for the Democrats.
You think? What do you think that's going to be? You're talking about a national emergency declaration?
No. I'm writing a story about this, so I'll tease you a little bit. Okay. After 30 days of furlough, the president of the United States has the power to create a reduction in force.
I have heard about this. Yeah, I heard that. You mean he can just lay off a bunch of people?
Yes.
Wow. Well, yeah, go ahead. What would that mean?
Well, if there are 800,000 people, and I'm not going to give away the total story, but if there are 800,000 people, I'm going to tell you that in the story that I'm writing, Mr. Trump, because he's a businessman, will look at it the same way that General Motors looks at it when they decided to lay off 17,000 people, including union people. And so I think that there are some things, and if you understand that in the month of December, the United States created 312,000 new jobs. If we have 800,000 people that are out of work who are laid off from the government, the private sector can take some of those, and so the economic impact of those jobs being lost and not being replaced and government downsized will actually be a positive thing as opposed to a negative.
Wow. That would certainly be historic. There's no question about that. Hey, Dan,
Yep.
where can people go to find that article that you're writing right now on this subject?
Go to danperkins.guru, Guru, and you can see stuff about my books, radio commentaries like this, and television and international television, and on a list of a bunch of commentaries from about 15 different sources that I write for.
All righty. Dan Perkins, we appreciate it, sir, as always.
Thank you.
All righty.
Thank you.
Folks, we're going to take a break. Going to reset here. Wouldn't that be incredible? I mean, that would be nuts, but I have heard that. I have heard that theory that after 30 days of a government shutdown, the president now has the ability to actually make mass reductions in the size of the federal workforce, which would be, well, I mean, you can imagine what the media would do if that were the case, but we brought you an article last week talking about how in some instances, not in all, I mean, we've got some problems with terminals and airports and things like that. Agriculture people can't cash their checks, or their checks aren't able to be signed. I was hearing something about that unless the government's open. So there are some issues that are coming down the pike. But in some cases, there are reports that the government is running more efficient than it ever has because you don't have all of these people working against the administration's goals and agenda with the skeleton crew that's still there. Anyway, all that remains to be seen.